Week 15 of the fantasy baseball season, and here's a few hitters I looked at off the wire this week. The first hitter, Ben Rice of the New York Yankees. So Ben Rice, they called him up a couple weeks ago, was this Yankee team where he showed some good pop in the minor leagues. And obviously Anthony Rizzo, he's going to be out for a while with his injury. So Ben Rice, he's been starting versus righties with J.D. Davis versus lefties. But Rice had that breakout game with 3 home runs yesterday. And right now, a hot pickup, obviously, on the waiver wire. Only available in 57% of fantasy leagues on the season. 4 home runs, 12 RBIs, 8 runs scored, a 294 average, and a 383 on base. So one thing with Rice, his strikeout rate hasn't been all that crazy. And he's a guy with catcher eligibility as well, which is a big thing. Even though he's at first base, the only problem, we'll see if the Yankees ever give him a chance versus lefties. But he's in there versus righties in a platoon right now. So the last few games, July 2nd versus the Reds, 1 for 4, 2 home runs. July 4th versus the Reds, 1 for 5, a homer and RBI. July 5th versus Boston, 1 for 4. And July 6th, the breakout game versus the Red Sox, 3 for 5, 3 homers, 7 RBIs. So now 4 home runs in the last 3 games here for Ben Rice. We'll see if the power stroke could continue. And we know this Yankee team's desperate for offense besides Aaron Judge and Soto, where over the last month, the team's been in the tailspin. So right now, well, Rice is coming off the monster game. And like I said, that catch eligibility is huge. He's available in 57% of fantasy leagues. And the last chance for owners to go out there and get him. The next hitter I looked at off the wire this week is Brooks Lee of the Minnesota Twins. So one of their top prospects in the system. And he's come up and he's for this Minnesota Twin team. So with Royce Lewis out once again, Lee fills in. And we'll see what he could do for this Twin team. But so far in 15 at-bats, he's gone out there and he's teared it up. 1 home run, 6 RBIs, 2 runs scored, a 467 average, and a 471 on base. So he did everything he had to do in the minor leagues was Brooks Lee. And now coming up in a very small sample size in 4 games in the major leagues. And he's looked good. July 3rd versus Detroit, 2 for 4 in RBI. July 4th versus Detroit, 1 for 2 in RBI. July 5th versus Houston, 3 for 5 a run, 2 RBIs. And July 6th versus Houston, 1 for 4, a homer, 2 RBIs. So Lee, like I said, no pressure, batting in that 8th and 9th spot for this Minnesota Twin team. Royce Lewis, he was playing good baseball. And he's one of the top prospects that did it all in the minor leagues was Brooks Lee. And the time was now where Minnesota needed some pop, especially after Lewis was hitting a lot of home runs, small amount of time. So right now, while Brooks Lee is up and he qualifies at shortstop for this Minnesota Twin team, that adds good versatility as well. He's an ad this week, available right now. 68% of fantasy leagues. Next hitter is Luis Garcia of the Washington Nationals. So Luis Garcia, he's been getting things going of late here for this national team. And right now, one of the better pickups this week off the wire, added in 16% of fantasy leagues, but still available in tons of leagues at 68% on the season. 10 home runs, 44 RBIs, 12 stolen bases, 30 runs scored, a 277 average, and a 308 on base in the last 2 weeks here for Garcia. 3 home runs, 11 RBIs, 2 stolen bases, 8 runs scored, a 333 average, and a 362 on base. So Garcia, obviously, he's been a player over the last couple seasons now that's been full-time with this Washington national team. And last season wasn't a good year at all for him for the most part. 9 home runs, 50 RBIs, 9 stolen bases, a 266 average. Where already this year he's got more home runs than last year. More stolen bases, a better average by a little bit, and a good on-base percentage. So right now, if you need help at second base and Garcia's on a tear in a national lineup that all of a sudden isn't too bad, in my opinion, I would give him an ad this week. July 2nd versus the Mets, 0 for 1. July 3rd, a breakout game versus the Mets, 2 for 3, 2 homers, 4 RBIs, 3 runs scored. July 5th versus the Cardinals, 4 for 5, a homer, 2 RBIs, a stolen base. And July 6th versus the Cardinals, 3 for 5, a run, 2 RBIs. So right now, Garcia, he could give you 3 or 4 categories. He's got some underrated pop. He's going to drive in some runs, batting 5th to 6th for this national team. And he's going to steal some bases as well. So right now, if you need a second baseman, I think Garcia is a great ad this week. And like I said, he's been a full-time player for this national team over the last couple seasons. The next hit is Gabriel Moreno of the Arizona Diamondbacks. So a former top prospect many seasons ago in the Blue Jays system. Moreno, so far this season, the numbers overall haven't been great, but the last 2 weeks he's on a tear. On the year, 4 home runs, 30 RBIs, a stolen base, 26 runs scored, a 250 average, and a 331 on base. But the last 2 weeks, 1 home run, 4 RBIs, a stolen base, 3 runs scored, a 471 average, and a 526 on base. So right now, he's tearing it up is Moreno the last few weeks, out there in 60% of fantasy leagues, and maybe finally he's getting to break out and could reach full potential is Moreno. July 3rd at the Dodgers, 3 for 5, a homer, 2 RBIs. July 4th at the Dodgers, 3 for 5, 2 ribs, a stolen base. And July 5th at the Padres, 1 for 3 with a run. July 6th at the Padres, 0 for 1. So right now Moreno, he's playing good baseball for this Arizona Diamondback team. They're trying to get back in the wild card hunt, where there's a lot of teams hovering around 500 and only about a game and a half to 3 games out. So if Moreno could get going and help this Diamondback team get back to the postseason and help fantasy owners, especially at a weak catcher position, he's definitely a solid add this week. Next hitter is another catcher, Shea Langoliers of the Oakland Athletics. So if you just need power and you don't care about batting average, Langoliers is going to help fantasy owners, where I think he'll be good for points leagues more than category leagues. On the season, 17 home runs, 45 RBIs, 4 stolen bases, 31 runs scored, a 208 average, and a 258 on base. So last season, Langoliers hit 22 home runs, so we know the pop is definitely legit. And over the last month of the season, 5 homers, 15 RBIs, 2 stolen bases, 9 runs scored. Actually, his average went up a little bit, 220 and a 238 on base. So he's the prototypical power hitter. Going to strike out a lot is Langoliers, but he's going to hit a lot of home runs and drive-in runs for this Oakland Athletic team. July 2nd versus the Angels, 1 for 4 run. July 3rd versus the Angels, 1 for 4 run. July 5th versus the O's, 1 for 4 a homer and RBI. And July 6th versus the O's, 2 for 6 a homer, 3 RBIs, and 2 runs scored. So right now, he's been clean up or 5th all season for this Oakland Athletic team, and he's not going to go anywhere. He's going to stay in the lineup, and right now he's on pace for about 30 home runs, which is a big number at a catcher position. Even if the average is bad, like I said, I would sacrifice that for power, especially in points leagues at catcher, and he's available right now in 71% of fantasy leagues. The next hitter is Brandon Lau of the Tampa Bay Rays. So Lau, he's been injured up and down. Next hit is Brandon Lau of the Tampa Bay Rays. So he's been up and down throughout his career with this Tampa Bay Ray team, and he sits versus lefties. But we've seen power throughout his career. Last season he had 21 home runs, and this year he's been injured at times. On the year, 8 home runs, 25 RBIs, a stolen base, 23 runs scored, a 226 average, and a 327 on base. So another second baseman where he's going to show power. He's going to drive in some runs, and we know this Tampa team, they need some pop in this lineup. And the last month for Lau, 6 home runs, 11 RBIs, a stolen base, 13 runs scored, a 232 average, and a 325 on base. So the only problem with him, obviously, he's not going to bat versus lefties, but he hits in a good hitter's park over there in Tampa Bay. July 2nd at the Royals, 1 for 4, homer and RBI, 2 runs scored. July 3rd at the Royals, 0 for 3. July 4th at the Royals, 3 for 5, a homer, an RBI, 3 runs scored. July 5th at Texas, 1 for 4. And July 6th at Texas, 0 for 2. So right now, he's playing better baseball since he returned off the injured list is Brandon Lau. And this Tampa Bay Ray team, we know they're desperate for some offense. So right now, while he's available in 75% of fantasy leagues, he's definitely an add this week. Next hitter is Cole Keith of the Detroit Tigers. And Keith, one of the top prospects in the Tigers system. And he was a sleeper to me coming into the year. But so far, he really hasn't been good until the last couple weeks, where he's starting to get things going. And injuries have held him back as well this season. On the year, 7 home runs, 28 RBIs, 27 runs scored, 4 stolen bases, a 241 average, and a 285 on base. So Keith, he don't work the count a lot. He's a free swinger. But for the last couple weeks, it's worked out for him. 4 home runs, 8 RBIs, 9 runs scored, a 289 average, and a 304 on base. Available right now in tons of leagues at 82%. Second baseman, there's a lot of decent second basemen to add off the wire, where we know second base is a weak position. July 3rd in Minnesota, 2 for 5, 2 runs. July 4th in Minnesota, 2 for 4, a homer and RBI. July 5th at the Reds, 2 for 5, 2 homers, 3 RBIs. And July 6th at the Reds, 1 for 3. So right now, Cole Keith showing power, starting to show why he was one of the top prospects in this system for the Detroit Tigers. And I would give him an add this week. He's going to bring some pop, and he's playing every day for Detroit as well, which is always a plus. And we know they need some offense in that lineup. The next hitter, Paul DeJong of the Chicago White Sox. DeJong's been a surprise this season here for the White Sox, where he's showing power once again. 16 home runs, 36 RBIs, 36 runs scored, 2 stolen bases, a 236 average, and a 285 on base. Over the last month, he's had 6 home runs, 15 RBIs, 13 runs scored, a 260 average, and a 302 on base. So DeJong, the typical power hitter as well. He's going to strike out a whole lot. He's going to hit about 25, 30 home runs this season if he keeps it up. Available right now in tons of fantasy leagues here is DeJong in 86%. So if you need power and a shortstop, it's a perfect ad for fantasy owners, I believe, especially in points leagues. July 2nd at Cleveland, 1 for 3 with a run. July 4th at Cleveland, 1 for 4, a homer, 2 RBIs. July 5th at the Marlins, 1 for 3, a run. And July 6th at the Marlins, 0 for 3. So DeJong also most likely will be a trade candidate towards the deadline in the next few weeks here, where obviously this White Sox team's going nowhere, and they're going to trade off a lot of people, and especially veterans like a Paul DeJong, where they could get something in the deal, because obviously he's not going to be part of this White Sox team future. So right now, with DeJong showing good power and an everyday starter for the White Sox for now, he's definitely a good ad this week. Next hitter, Leody Taveras of the Texas Rangers. So Taveras, he showed some flashes this season, and last year I thought he had a pretty solid year with Taveras. 14 home runs, 67 RBIs last season, 14 stolen bases, a 266 average, and a 312 on base. And this season, 5 home runs, 20 RBIs, 10 stolen bases, 33 runs scored, a 232 average, and a 302 on base. So his on-base batting average is a good ratio, 70% points higher. But over the last couple weeks, he's starting to really get things going, is Taveras. No home runs, 5 RBIs, 4 runs scored, 4 stolen bases, a 382 average, and a 463 on base. So that's something in deeper leagues owners should be interested in. Taveras out there right now in 94% of leagues, and he's batting usually 7th or 9th for the most part for this Ranger team, where they got a lot of good talented hitters in that lineup, where Taveras is going to get good pitches to hit, and they definitely need him to get going, because this Ranger team has definitely struggled for the most part this season. July 3rd versus the Padres, 1 for 3 in RBI. July 2nd versus the Padres, 1 for 4. July 5th versus Tampa Bay, 1 for 4. And July 6th versus Tampa, 2 for 2 with a run. So right now in deeper leagues, I think Taveras can help fantasy owners. I'm not saying he's going to keep up hitting over 380 the rest of the season, but right now, well, he's been hitting the baseball great, and he's an everyday starter for this Texas Ranger team. He's definitely an ad this week. Final hit I will take off the wall is John Singleton of the Houston Astros. So Singleton, he's playing every day for this Houston Astros team after Jose Abreu got cut a few weeks ago, and he's making the most of his opportunity for Houston. The top pick many seasons ago, going back, is Singleton on the year. 7 home runs, 22 RBIs, 29 runs scored, a 242 average, and a 341 on base. But over the last month of the season, very solid. 2 home runs, 8 RBIs, 9 runs scored, a 321 average, and a 406 on base. So like I said, Abreu, they showed him the door was Houston. He just wasn't worth the investment. And it looks like Abreu's best days were behind him. And they had Singleton, who obviously didn't do much in the major leagues, where he was a former top pick in the MLB draft and was a bust, but now back in the majors over the last few seasons. And this year, he's definitely turned things around. July 2nd at Toronto, 1 for 3, a run. July 3rd at Toronto, 1 for 2, 2 runs. July 4th at Toronto, 1 for 3, 2 RBIs. July 5th in Minnesota, 2 for 5, 2 runs. And July 6th in Minnesota, 1 for 4 with a homer, 2 RBIs. So like I said, Singleton's getting an opportunity. He's made the most of it. I know he's more of a deeper league ad, obviously. Available 98% of fantasy leagues, virtually available everywhere. But right now in a 12-team league or deeper, with a lot of spots on the roster, I think Singleton can help fantasy owners. That's a few hitters I looked at off the wire for Week 15 of the fantasy baseball season.